Hey, folks, once again, welcome to Draft Talk at Pittsburgh Sports Live. I'm Alan Saunders. That's Nick Farabaugh. We're talking about the Pittsburgh Steelers and the 2023 NFL Draft all the way up until draft day at the end of April. We're going to go every Tuesday and Thursday here in the early part of the offseason. We've already been at the Senior Bowl. We're going to move through the Combine and Pro Days, free agency, all the steps that lead up to the big draft day. Today, we're going to kind of break down the Steelers draft needs. I've been writing about that at the site at SteelersNow.com all this week, and it's been pretty stark when you sit down and look at all of the things I've written about. Nick, they only have 7 draft picks. I think I've named about 30 spots where I found a need for the Steelers. What is just your general take on the state of this roster and where they are headed into the offseason? I think they're in a strange place.
Yeah, they're in a weird place, right? Because you're in a weird spot where you need to support your quarterback that's young, but you also have a lot of needs defensively. It's really weird, and it's very hard to balance those because the utmost importance is going to be making sure Kenny Pickett is the best environment to take a lead. Like he is the A1 of all of this, but we can't just ignore all of the needs on defense. In fact, I think there are more needs on defense just looking at it than there are on offense. Like just
Way more,
as a
way more.
like way more, right?
I think there's two things, right? So where do they need to fill missing pieces in order to maintain what they had last year? Okay. And that all comes on defense, right? I mean, Terrell Edmunds, Cam Sutton, Devin Bush, Robert Spillane, Larry Ogunjobi, Chris Wormley, like that's, I don't know, 5,000 snaps of defense, something like that, like a whole bunch, right? On offense, the only guys that are free agents that played more than a tiny bit are Zach Gentry, Derek Watt, and Steven Sims. Like that is not a. But at the same time, like last year's defense was probably good enough, and last year's offense was definitely not, right? So like they had on defense, they have some work to do to get themselves back to 9-8. On offense, they have some work to do to be better than 9-8. I think is the way I break it down.
Yeah, I mean, listen, it's a tough kind of area to be in, but this is one of the big reasons why they made that Chase Claypool trade.
Yeah,
They just need a lot of things.
it's
This is a
another reason I think we could see them trade down from 17, just because when you look at all the places they could use some help, they only have 7 picks. Like it would make sense to get a couple more if they can. I
they,
think that's a very realistic possibility.
yeah, especially because they're not, they have cap flexibility, but they're not swimming in it like they were last year, right?
Yeah, I mean
Like
they're not going
last
to
year,
sign more than 4 or 5 free agents, combine their own with external guys.
yeah, like last year, right? They were very active on the free agency market from James Daniels to Mason Cole, re-signing Chooks, getting Ogunjobi, KZ, Edmonds is back, like Miles Jack comes in. It's not going to be anything like that this year. They just don't have the money to work with in terms of that raw cap number. And unless they make some drastic move that changes the way this team is constructed, which again, I don't envision that. And what I'm talking about that is like trading Deontay Johnson, right? Like that is a changing move, but they're not
Cam
going to do that.
Hayward retires. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah,
Like, just like
like
something big.
like
Right.
something huge, right? Like, but they're not going to do that. I just and there's really no reason to do any of that. So the draft takes the utmost importance. And if you want to get to the playoffs next year, I do think a lot of their hope and a lot of their focus should be on retention defensively. Cam Sutton, I think they should. If I were Omar Khan and Andy Weidel, I would bring back all 3 of my free agents in the secondary. I would bring back Edmonds, Sutton, and KZ. I like that secondary a lot. And then I would draft a corner and get this secondary bumping. And so like that's to me kind of what you got to focus on. You want to improve, but also you got to make sure you maintain what you have because it could get worse. Like this roster last year was not that good. It was not. They overachieved. This was not a good
Absolutely
team.
overachieved last year.
Like this was a 5-12 roster on paper.
I don't know about that, but it was probably closer like a 7-10 roster, I'd say.
But the
And to
fact that
go
they, like the
nine
fact
and
that
eight.
they, yeah, I mean, I just think the fact they had a winning season was kind of crazy. They that was not a good roster, and they definitely overachieved.
Now they're missing a bunch of pieces of it. I agree that I think retention should be the key on defense. Those five guys they're losing from the defense, six if you count KZ. I agree. I think they need to re-sign Cam Sutton. He's an integral part of their defense. I think they need to try to sign Terrell Edmonds. I really think they need to try to sign Larry Ogunjobi or just address defensive line in free agency. I do not think this is a particularly deep defensive line draft class. I think there are some guys that I've identified that I like that I think would help the Steelers. But when you look at it and then you look at where they pick, it's like one or maybe two guys per draft pick that fit. It's like, okay, who could go at 17? Well, it's like, well, maybe Brian Bresee, maybe at 32, it's like maybe Siaki Ika. Like there just aren't that many. It only takes one team to screw up the draft plan at any position, and then you're stuck. You don't have one, and they need three guys there. So like that's a position where you could see them sign someone in free agency and then turn around and go right back to in the draft. Same thing with corner. I think they need multiple bodies at corner as well. But man, I think a lot of that work on defense needs to be done in free agency, and then leave the potential upgrades to the offense to the draft, because that's where you can find. Like, I don't expect the Steelers to be signing like top tier free agents with the money they have. Like, none of their guys are top tier free agents, and that's good. They can spread it around a little bit and get 4 or 5 of them, but they're not going to sign somebody that's at the top of the market in free agency. They can go add a big time talent in the draft, probably 2 or 3 of them with the number of high draft picks they have. And maybe we'll see more of that emphasis on offense than on defense. But it's a really weird spot. Like, I think there's reason for optimism the way they finished the season. Kenny Pickett's improved play, but this is a difficult offseason for Omar Khan for his first one of these. Like, it's a tough needle to thread here.
Yeah, it is. And you mentioned that free agency period. Like, the one position on offense I can see them addressing in free agencies is wide receiver.
I agree.
Like, I would expect that because it's a deep corner draft. So I would, if I'm Omar Khan, I get Cam Sutton done, and I'm like, all right, till the draft, that's my corner room.
Yeah, I agree.
Like,
Also, if they get Cam Sutton done, they should do it tomorrow because the contract voids and they can save themselves $2 million.
exactly. Like, exactly, right? Like, it would be very, very important if they could get it done. I don't know if that's even started though. But like, I just look at the uncertainty of the defense right now. By the time that they are into April, just about all that should be cleared up. Like, okay, you know where you're targeting.
At least all but one position, right? I think
Yeah.
that's the key, is like get it to at least, and I think to me, inside linebacker is the one. I think this inside linebacker class, although doesn't have a lot of like high-end talent, is pretty deep, and that they should feel good about being able to find a guy, whether that's, second round, third round, fourth round, that can step in and be maybe not an immediate starter, or at least not maybe immediate starter at a high level, but at the very least an immediate contributor. And you add that to Mark Robinson and Miles Jack, and I don't know, you can figure it out. And whether they bring a guy like Rob Spillane back or not, I think that's still a position of need. But so let's break it down. I listed the immediate needs as on offense, just wide receiver. Specifically, they need a slot receiver, although they could add an outside receiver and move Deontay Johnson inside. That would work just as well. Corner, defensive tackle, inside linebacker, and strong safety. Anything you feel like you need to add to that list, or is there an order to them to you? Like, to me, there isn't. They're all, I kind of weight them all about equally.
I mean, they're, in terms of like pure glaring hole, the two that stick out to me are D tackle and inside backer.
Yeah,
Like,
and
if we're talking
those
about
spots where they're losing multiple guys, right? You're losing
exactly,
you have 3 free agents at each of those positions.
right. So like, those would probably be your most glaring needs right now, but because they're so glaring, they're going to address them in free agency. So I think we can go in with an assumption that we're going to kind of know a little bit about those two rooms probably by the end of the legal tampering period, to be quite honest with you. I think the Steelers are going to be active very early on in free agency, and I don't think they're going to do much after until like later.
I think strong safety, I'll add to that, is like, that is absolutely going to get taken care of before the draft, one way or the other. Either they're bringing back Terrell Edmonds or they'll sign somebody else. Like, I don't see any other way that goes down.
I think if they don't bring back Terrell Edmonds, they'll bring back KZ at the very least. So I mean, he could start for
And he,
you.
sorry. Yeah, I mean,
So like,
one way or the other, they're getting at least one of their strong safeties handled before we get to the
mhm.
draft. I believe wide receiver, I think, is a position they could address early or not. It's a deep wide receiver class, not a high end wide receiver class, but is a deep wide receiver class, so they can kind of let that go if they want. Also, expect the Steelers to be patient with free agency. I think this is a year where we're going to see them do a lot on the first day of free agency, draft, and then maybe we'll see them sign some guys in June. Some guys that get left behind, and try to be active again in the second half of
Yep.
things. Um, I definitely see that as a paradigm. Okay, so let's talk about upgrades, right? I mean, obviously they're only 9-8 last year. Even if you go sign all 5 of those guys that are set to become free agents, you don't want to just run back 9-8, right? I mean, where can they get better than they were last year using the 2023 draft?
I think the answer is the offensive line. I mean, like that's why they need to take care of the defense and free agency because this O line needs upgrades, man. Like it's fine. It's what it is. It's a slightly below average to league average line at this point, which is much better than what it was last year. But like it's not a great line, and you need great lines to win in this league. And that left side of the line is just glaring right now. The right side. I like James Daniels. I think he's a long term piece for them at right guard, but I don't know if anyone else on the line outside of him is a long term piece. So if you can get an upgrade at center, I think you take it. I know that's probably controversial given how well Mason Cole played on a bad foot, but he's never proven in his career that he can be a legitimately very good NFL center. So I mean, if the right guy comes around, if you get a John Michael Schmitz at good value, jump on it. If you get a left guard, if you get an Osiris Torrance, jump on it. If you get a left tackle, right? If you like that pick at 17, if a Skaronski, a Jones, a Johnson are there, jump on it. Like that's what they need to do to me. This O line has to be built. And that's why, to me, in terms of if I'm listing draft needs, O line takes one, like number one, because while it's an upgrade, not an immediate starting thing, for the long term, having a guy that is going to be a stalwart on your line that you can have there in the future is going to be very important for Kenny Pickett and give him security. So I look at the O line. I also do think receiver is a position that they can look to level up at. I just think after trading Claypool, they just never replaced him. It was kind of Pat Fryermuth, and that's fine and all, but they need a slot guy. And Sims is fine, but you can also get a dynamic guy in that role, and so that's an upgrade opportunity. But I think you and I both agree the O line is really where the upgrades come here.
Yeah, I think they need a slot receiver, and that's more of a hole than an upgrade to me. I just I don't. I mean, even Steven Sims is a free agent, right? They got to do something
I
there.
mean, I could. So I wouldn't be
Anthony Miller,
ideal.
I guess. I don't. Calvin Austin. I mean, I don't know. Like,
Yeah, I mean, well, it wouldn't be ideal, but it if they went into the season with George Pickens, Deontay Johnson, Steven Sims, Calvin Austin, Miles Boykin, and like Anthony Miller as their receivers, like it's passable. It could happen. Like
yeah,
you don't want it to
I
happen,
don't think
but
it's
like
passable. It could happen, but I'm not sure it's passable.
I
It's not
mean,
a
it
very
could.
good group.
Like it's not a great group, but it's also just like it's not necessarily a position where if they want to, that could be like need one next year if they really wanted it to
Yeah, I
be.
agree with that. And I think it gives them a year to really see what they have in George Pickens. We've talked about that before. The other place I listed as an upgrade is nose tackle. And the Steelers have not used their nose tackle necessarily a lot in recent years, but they used them more in 2022, and it did not go well. Now, obviously, they used both Tyson Alulu and Montravius Adams in that spot. Alulu is a free agent. Adams is back. Neither were very good. In fact, if you believe in Pro Football Focus, they were 2 of the worst defensive linemen in all football last year. I'm not sure they were that bad, but they certainly weren't good. I think the Steelers would be hesitant to use a high draft pick on nose tackle, but there are maybe starting with like their second pick in the second round and then forward. Like It's certainly something that they
So,
don't have. And given how much the teams in their division run the football, I mean, if you look at the top 10 teams in rushing rate last season, the Steelers have 5 games against those 10 teams on their schedule next year. They've got Tennessee, and they've got 2 games against Baltimore and 2 games against Cleveland. Like, they're going to need to be able to run base defense and feel comfortable in it. I don't think that was the case at any point in 2022. I think now they could get someone in free agency that can both fill Larry Ogunjobi's role and be a nose tackle in the 3-4. That's possible. But if they don't do that, I think they've got to find a way to be able to run that package out there with a little more confidence.
see, I think that's just a glaring hole. I don't think they have a nose tackle on this roster I trust at all. So, like I at least at receiver, like if Sims and Miller and Austin have to be a committee, cool. Like it could be decent enough. And you know, like you have Dan Moore at left tackle, like not ideal, but it's fine. See, at like nose tackle, dude, like they
It's
were
a
throwing
big hole, but like you're only talking about 20% of the snaps. I think that's why, like, I don't
yeah,
put
but
it at the same
it's a
level as those other ones.
they just get nothing out of that position, man. Like
Yeah.
it's a glaring hole to me. I think that they have to get like I would not be surprised if they address that with their second pick at 32. You know,
Okay.
Ika could be there. You know, at 49 even now since he's starting to creep up boards like Keanu Benton is a guy that could be there. Like there are some nose tackles in this class that make a lot of sense for them. And so I just feel like that's going to be an early pick. They need a nose, man. They need a guy that can play from nose out to a 5. Like they need a versatile guy.
Well, I
And
don't
maybe
think they're
that's
gonna get that, but I like if they could get nose to 4 eye, I think they would take it.
I mean Benton can do like nose to 4 eye probably. So like that's why he keeps making a lot of sense. And that's why they showed a lot of interest in him, which is not surprising at all. But like that could be their splash signing of the offseason. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if their splash signing is big Javon Hargrave, like returning. Like it makes
And
sense.
even
And
Javon is not like what I would call a traditional nose tackle, but would be a massive upgrade over what they have.
yeah, right. Like so, like I think like I've long
That's what,
thought
and
if
that's what I was talking about. Like they can sign a guy that is in the starting nickel
yeah,
alignment, the starter next to Cam Hayward, but then also is the nose tackle in a 3-4 you bring into Marvin Leal, and that's the line. If it's Javon Hargrave, that's the answer to both of those problems at the same time.
yeah, that's why it makes so much sense, right? Like the fact of the matter is that I feel like if they're going to make a big splashy signing in free agency, the D line is where it's going to be, and it makes a lot of
We need
sense.
so much help on the defensive line.
They do, and Hargrave,
We're
especially,
going to talk about them in every single category here today.
yeah,
Is
it's just a massive need. Like, and Jay Wobble knocks out about 2 of them in one man. Like,
Yeah,
and
he does.
that's why he would be such a
You're
signing.
talking about knocking out 2 defensive linemen in one man. It takes a big guy, but no,
Exactly right.
that's what they need. Absolutely.
And
And
like,
let's just keep this conversation in the same place and move it forward. The next step here is future needs. But like, okay, even if they sign Javon Hargrave, I don't think that rules out defensive tackle very early. Cam Hayward is
no,
33 and has openly talked about he's not sure how long he wants to keep doing this or is going to be able to keep doing this. And they have zero depth behind them. So it's not like if they go out and spend the most money they spend at any position in free agency to go get Javon Hargrave, that they could not very easily come back and draft defensive line first round, maybe even certainly second round, right back behind that signing.
that's been an interesting trend to watch recently. You know, it'd been a lot of cornerback in the mocks. D line, you know, Brissy has been there, but Lucas Van Ness is very interesting as well. He's different in terms of he's not going to give you like a guy that can go all the way in the nose, but he'll be a traditional 5 and he can stand up or put his hand in the dirt as a 7 in your sub packages. He could probably slide in a little more, but
He feels more like a Cam Hayward replacement than anything else, than anyone else
yeah.
that I've
And
seen
that's why
in
like
this
that's why it
draft.
makes sense, right? Like, okay, you make a splashy signing in free agency. What do you do with the follow up? Oh, you add that guy. Like it makes sense there. They just have a lot that they need on that D line. And it's a massively important position for what they want to do. So they have to make sure it fits. And for future needs, D line is the A1. Period. They
Yeah.
have nothing there for the future right now outside of Liao. And you don't. And what is Liao? Like, is Liao an edge now? Like, we don't know.
So I kind of wrote down that Liao. I feel like he's 5 and out. Right. That's him to me. Like if you need to play base defense, he can be an end. If you want to play him as a rush end in the 4-man front, that's fine. If you want to stand him up as an outside linebacker, he can do that a little bit. But like, I don't think you can talk about him in the conversations about defensive tackle where it's mostly 4-eye and in. I don't think that's him.
It's not him, and that's why it's a fascinating place because their one young piece is
Doesn't
very
fit any of the
interesting,
needs that they
but
have.
he doesn't fit the needs.
Yeah.
Okay, having a guy that can play 5 tech and out feels like a luxury, right?
Well, it makes
But
sense if they want to play more base defense, right? If they
it
want to play
does.
more base, having a guy that's a pure 5 tech makes a lot of sense. But they don't have the nose tackle to play more base defense, right? Like it doesn't. If they sign a nose tackle and your base defense becomes Cam, Javon Hargrave, DeMarvin Leal, then that pick starts to make a lot of sense. But based on what
Yeah,
they've been doing, which is run 80% even front without a nose, he just doesn't fit what they do a lot of the time.
yeah. And I also think the question here is do they want to get another 5 tech? Do they think that
I don't know
Liao
how
can
they could
start?
it can't be just another 5 tech. It's got to be one way or the other. I don't know. I can't just
Well, I mean, I'm just saying, is Liao going to start opposite of Cam Hayward next year? Is that what they want?
no.
Like,
I
what do
can't.
they want, right?
I can't see that. I just
Like,
can't. Not
so,
unless he puts on 30 pounds this offseason.
so we go back to a Brissy Van Ness type pick in 17. Well, you sign a nose, whoever that nose is, they plug him in at nose, and you put the 5 tech. That's your first round pick opposite Cam Hayward. That's what you could do. I mean, and it feels like to me the nose would be less expensive than a 5 tech. Depends if you're getting a true nose specifically.
If you're
It
getting
ain't gonna
just
be
a
that
true
expensive.
nose, yeah, but there aren't that many of them out there. Like that,
No, it's a
it's a
dying
limited
breed,
market.
right?
Yeah, right. And there
It's a
just are
dying.
only so many 330 pound plus individuals in the world. Um,
Yes.
so I mean, it's a tough that again, like we talked about this entire offseason, like is there a path forward there? Yeah, but it's not easy. There's only so many options at that position, and it'd be difficult to make it work. The other 2 positions I listed for future needs are inside linebacker and corner, specifically highlighting Miles Jack and Levi Wallace as guys that I don't see as like guys that they're going to be in a big hurry to re-sign, that they would, if they can find a player, probably starting in the 3rd round on with some projectability that they could groom as a future replacement for those guys, I think they would be all about. Art Millette also was, so I picked
Mhm.
corner. You could go either way with it, but to me, those 3 guys are all signed for 2023. Even though Jack is a potential cap casualty, I think he'll probably be back. I figure they're all going to start or be very high rep players, but they aren't guys that like anybody's super excited about re-signing to long-term deals, and places the Steelers, if they're looking ahead, could be looking to draft behind with the eye of a guy eventually replacing them going forward.
Yeah, corner makes a lot of sense there. Inside linebacker, they just need more youth in that area too.
I think
The
Mark
guys that they can
Robinson
mold.
could kind of fit that role, but they need another body there too anyway. So like
Yeah.
they just need guys.
Also, you one position you didn't mention that I think is could be a future need is outside linebacker. I don't what's going on with Highsmith.
Yeah,
I
outside
think
linebacker I listed there as well. And that's basically purely dependent on what they can do with with Alex Highsmith's contract. If they can sign him, then they don't have a future starting need there. But if they can't, then they absolutely do. I mean,
hmm Yeah, I mean, here's the thing, right? That's going to be a question. It feels like a luxury to me, though, to try and go out and do it this offseason. It makes sense to do it. I just don't think they have the. I don't think they have the
we've
resources.
already listed more needs than they have draft picks and cap space to acquire, and we still have a whole category to go. So I agree with that.
Yeah,
I also think if you look at exactly what they did last year, they franchised Bud Dupree 1 year. They could certainly do that with Alex Highsmith if they get that far and they don't have
this
a solution.
this absolutely feels like to me an outside linebacker situation where, all right, you have a depth problem. Well, go sign someone on the cheap. You already brought back Quincy Roche. Here's a guy that got thrown around a little bit yesterday that makes a lot of sense. Chase Winovich, bring him in,
Yeah,
hometown kid.
yeah.
If Bud Dupree is a cap casualty in Tennessee, another guy makes sense. I think that's another free agency position that they will go after.
Not surprise me
Uh,
if they draft one too, just because the Steelers do love themselves some edge rushers. But
it's good
basically,
philosophy.
Quincy Roche is getting their 2021 draft pick back, and now they've got another shot at it. All right, that's a good transition to the depth needs, where I also listed outside linebacker because they don't have anybody there behind the two starters. Tight end and fullback. To me, if you're looking at the offensive needs, other than upgrading the offensive line and wide receiver, this is number one for me. I think Zach Gentry and Derek Watt are both free agents. Regardless of, I really don't expect them to sign both. They might not sign either. I expect them to bring in two people to fill tight end / fullback, and they kind of can go a couple different directions. I don't think they need to sign a pure fullback because of having Connor Hayward and his versatility.
Yeah, well, I think Hayward showed enough at the end of the year where he could be a tight end too. I really do believe that. So if they don't want to bring back Gentry, I get it. But they still need a guy that can go out there and really block. I think that's the thing, right? Muth and Hayward aren't great blockers. So Gentry being their best blocking tight end, if they let him walk, they need someone to come in there. So I look at that as a need. Shouldn't be an expensive one. Should be a pretty cheap option, whether it's Gentry or someone else. But it is a need. So I feel like that's something that'll get addressed pretty easily this offseason. But I think Hayward's ready to go up to tight end too. So we'll kind of see kind of how that works out.
Yeah, I think he's like an
One,
offensive tight end too, but he's not like a pure backup. Like he's a
mhm,
tight end too, but he's not really a backup to Muth, right? Like at the same time, like
yeah,
he doesn't play in line very often. Like his size, which is weird for a tight end and sometimes works for him, like makes it hard to like make him a 1-to-1 replacement. Like, I think they need somebody that can be a pure backup.
yeah, they do. And so that's something that I imagine they will look at. Another position they probably could use a guy at. It's not going to come in free agency. It's probably going to come in the UDFA process. They do need another running back. Benny Snell's a free agent.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. Benny Snell being a free agent certainly makes that. Although they do have Anthony McFarland, so I mean, I guess it's
yeah,
possible
but
they
here's
could
the
just roll
issue.
with those three guys.
Like they need the issue is though, man. Unless you're placing it all on Jalen Warren's hands, which I mean, yes, he's a good special teamer, but Benny is a very good special teamer, and they need someone to replace his special teams, or they need him back. Like that to me is something that they'll need to look into. Just kind of, they need a running back that I think can do a little bit more special team stuff because Jalen Warren gets so much tread on offense. You don't want him just trotting out there all the time on every special teams unit.
He's
He's
also a
just
pretty
so
small guy comparatively, compared to like
yeah,
Benny
yeah.
and Derek Watt. Like he's 50 pounds lighter than those guys.
Yeah, so I think a running back makes sense, but I would expect that to be a very vet min or a UDFA type deal. So whether that's Benny Snell or someone else, it is a depth need, but it's something that they have to look at. I think I'd also say outside wide receiver is kind of a depth need. Whether it's Miles Boykin or someone else, they need a guy that can be a gunner, and they need a guy that they can. God forbid George Pickens ever gets hurt.
Yeah.
Someone steps in.
Well, see, to me, it depends on how they address the slot need, right? Like if the slot need gets filled by drafting Jackson Smith and Jigba, well, then okay, like that he's your backup outside. If something happens, you move him out, you play Miller and there or Austin, and there you go. If the slot need doesn't get addressed or gets addressed by a guy who's 5'8", then you still need to find somebody that can be a backup outside receiver. I guess it could be re-signing Miles Boykin. But that certainly is a hole right now for them on offense.
Yeah, so I look at that too. Also, I'll say this: uh, how about swing tackle?
Well, it's
That's
on my
one.
list. It's on my list.
Yeah,
Like, so even if they upgrade tackle, to me, here's the question: like, if they get one big signing and it's tackle, like, then to me, like, okay, does that mean that Chooks is a cap casualty? Does that mean that they try Dan Moore at guard? Like, just drafting tackle doesn't necessarily provide them depth at tackle. Uh, I think they've really neglected, like, the offensive line position has been so neglected that they went through like 3 different groups of backup offensive line at training camp last year and ended up at the end of the process throwing them all away to go trade for Jesse Davis, and then he lost his job to Trenton Scott. Like, they have no backups to speak of whatsoever on this offensive line. Go get a tackle somewhere on day 3, regardless of whether or not they find an upgrade early, just to build up some depth to that room.
They need depth, man.
Center also, I think, Kendrick Green kind of proved he's not a center. I think he's at least a legitimate backup guard, but JC Hassenauer is a free agent, hasn't done much in a couple of years. I think a backup center certainly makes a lot of sense as a depth need for this team.
Yeah, they need, yeah, even if they do end up drafting a tackle, like whoever it is,
Early. Yeah.
yeah, like that guy, if they draft that guy at 17, that guy's starting.
Right.
And then if you're Dan Moore, well, or is Dan Moore the swing tackle, or is Dan Moore a guard? And I think that's the biggest thing. Like, I don't know what they will do with Dan Moore if they draft a tackle and try to draft over him, because he has made strides. Like, there's something there with Dan Moore that I don't know if he's like going to be a great player, but I think that he can be a starter in this league. So it feels like a waste just to say, "Oh, Dan, you're the swing tackle." Like, I would
Right.
want to try
They
Dan
move
Moore
the right
guard.
tackle and then try to like cut or trade Chooks. So they move him to guard. Like, I don't know. There's options there, but those options then make them no depth at tackle, right? Like,
Yeah, like I would much like, so okay, what you could do is Dan Moore could be the swing tackle while learning guard. Like that's what
yeah,
could
yeah,
happen.
that's possible.
Um, like he could be in the competition with Kevin Dotson for the left guard spot, and then basically whoever wins
And if something
wins.
happens at tackle, you just kick him back
Yeah,
outside.
you just kick him back out and Dotson comes in.
Yeah.
Cool. But still, like that's a lot of moving around. I am always saying this to people. I hate moving guys around the O line. It's so hard to switch sides. You have no idea. The whole kinetic chain gets flipped. It is very hard. That's why whenever you tell me like you think Dan Moore's a right tackle, right? Like
Do.
I understand, but he's going to suck there because he has to learn it for 2 years before he's going to be good. So so the issue is if early in the career you're playing a guy that might be more of a right tackle, left tackle, well you just screwed his development 2 years. It's so hard to flip sides. And if you find a guy that can flip sides just like that and just do it, special talent. So like Dan Moore, if he is going to learn to be a swing tackle, this man hasn't played right tackle in forever. That's also going to be something to look at. I don't know. It's tough. Maybe Trent Scott can come back and be that kind of fourth guy with they can trust on, but it's just hard to cross train. And I think versatility is very overvalued in the NFL because a lot of those guys when they flip sides suck.
The last position I have on my list, quarterback. I think we've talked
Mhm.
about whether or not Mitch Trubisky makes sense as a depth option at his salary. I think no matter what, whether it's Trubisky or someone else, they will have one experienced backup. But the Steelers have had 2 quarterbacks on their roster, or 3 quarterbacks on their roster, 2 backups the whole time under Mike Tomlin. I expect that to continue. And it would not totally surprise me if a quarterback's name gets called on day 3, especially if they're able to find a way somewhere in this process to get a couple extra draft picks. I really think drafting someone to be a backup makes a lot of sense. Go find Kenny's trusted confidant sidekick guy that can fill that role for a long time.
Yeah, I think that could make sense too. You know, I want to go back to upgrades real quick.
Hmm.
Here's a sleeper position that they could upgrade. Punter. Like legitimately. Like
Yeah, I
I
mean, it's certainly possible. I kind of doubt they will do it in the draft unless they are able to add like multiple more draft picks. To me, that's more if they're going to do it, you do it in free agency.
yeah,
Um, but it's certainly possible. I mean,
like it's just something to watch. I think also, I mean, I could throw long snapper in there. At times it did feel like Kuntz's snaps were a little high and it threw off a little bit of the stuff there. So I don't really expect them to go out and and like draft a long snapper, draft a punter. I just do think that they are going to be signing one in free agents and UDFA process, and there's going to be a punting and a long snapping competition this year. And it won't just be like a show, right? Like it's going to be a legitimate competition. So I'm just it's just something to look out for.
Chris
As
Boswell
for
wasn't that good this year either.
yeah,
Like, I mean, I expect there to be a legitimate competition at kicker too. Now, I don't think they'll use a draft pick on one, but
no,
I do think there will be a legitimate competition.
yeah, no, there's not going to be a draft pick on any of those, but there's going to be legit competitions. As for quarterback, they've met with a lot of them. Look at
Yeah.
the NFLPA Bowl. They met with a lot. They met with every single quarterback at the NFLPA Bowl. And
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 most
for
of the
reference,
quarterbacks at the Senior Bowl that they met with are guys that are going to be like sixth, seventh round picks. Like Tyson Badgett and Jared Hall and those guys. Like that's when they're going to get drafted.
yeah, I mean, like legitimately, I mean, they're clearly looking at that as being a possible thing. And it makes sense, like because at the NFLPA game, you don't have to meet with all 30 teams. You don't meet with all. It's not like a Senior Bowl where like you're set up with a process. You meet with all of them. Even at the Shrine game, it's the same way. You don't meet with every team, so you actually have to. The teams seek you out, and the Steelers have sought out an awful lot of quarterbacks thus far in the process. So I think that they'll probably look to draft one, or at least they're definitely adding one in the UDFA process. Maybe they'll draft one and add one in the UDFA process. I think it's possible. I do think that they just need someone there past this year. I don't know if Trubisky's going to be back. I think that's one of the more interesting decisions they'll be making this offseason.
I
And
think
if he's
whether or
not,
not he comes back, they will have a veteran guy, one veteran guy.
yeah.
For sure. But I think that second spot, I don't think you need a Mason Rudolph as your third quarterback. I think you can use that third spot on a younger developmental guy, save a little bit of cap space at the position and get somebody to be Kenny's, buddy and backup and helper for the long term. Nick, that was a lot there. And the Steelers have a big job this offseason. But we will continue this discussion and the rest of the Steelers draft discussion when we come back on Tuesday. If you got something you want us to hit, leave us a comment here on YouTube or at the site at SteelersNow.com, where you can find all my work and Nick's work, anything else before we wrap it up here on a drizzly Thursday this afternoon.
Yeah, they don't got much. I think we hit just about every single need that
It
they
was a long
have.
journey. We hit them
Yeah.
all, though, and there are many. We will see how Omar Khan and company are able to fill them. Until next time, I'm Alan Saunders. That's Nick Farabaugh. Thanks for watching Draft Talk on Pittsburgh Sports Live, and we'll see you soon.